The Arctic had always been quiet in a way that unsettled even seasoned sailors. Silence there was not empty. It was heavy, layered with centuries of ice, pressure, and memory. On this particular morning, that silence felt strained, as if the frozen world itself sensed that something fragile was about to break. The Norwegian patrol vessel Non Svalbard cut steadily through the grey waters north of Tromsø, its reinforced hull groaning softly as it pressed against thin sheets of drifting ice. Snow clung to the deck rails like frostbitten moss, and the wind carried a metallic cold that burned exposed skin within seconds. To the crew, this was routine. To Oslo, it was necessity. To Washington, it was becoming a problem. For decades, Norway had balanced carefully between cooperation and caution as a NATO member. It trained with American forces, hosted joint exercises, and shared intelligence. Yet Norway had always drawn a quiet but firm line round its Arctic sovereignty. The northern waters were not just strategic lanes, they were lifelines, fishing grounds, energy corridors, and cultural heartlands woven deeply into Norwegian identity. That balance had begun to crack when new Arctic surveys revealed vast, previously inaccessible energy reserves beneath the seabed. Melting ice made extraction possible. Possibility, in turn, attracted power. In Washington, the Arctic was no longer a distant map marked by white emptiness. It had become a chessboard at the Pentagon. Analysts spoke in measured tones about freedom of navigation and strategic access. Satellite images glowed across massive screens, highlighting shipping routes and undersea infrastructure. The language was professional, sanitized. But the intent was unmistakable. Whoever controlled the Arctic would shape global energy markets and future military mobility. Norway heard those words differently in Oslo. The Prime Minister stood before Parliament just days earlier, her voice steady but sharp as winter glass. "We welcome cooperation," she said. "But we will not outsource our sovereignty. The Arctic is not unclaimed. It is home." The statement rippled outward, amplified by international media, interpreted and reinterpreted through political lenses. American diplomats responded with reassurances. Joint statements emphasized alliance unity. Behind closed doors, however, military planners adjusted timelines and contingency models. Reassurance and preparation advanced. Side by side, the first sign that diplomacy was losing ground came quietly. A Norwegian research station on Svalbard reported unexplained interference in its satellite uplinks at first. Technicians blamed solar activity. Then similar disruptions appeared along the northern coast, brief, precise, and vanishing before diagnostics could lock onto them. Cyber specialists in Bergen noticed patterns that were too clean, too deliberate, to be natural. Someone was testing the ice. At sea, American naval movements increased. Officially, they were routine patrols, and officially, their proximity raised eyebrows. In Oslo, advanced destroyers cruised just outside Norwegian exclusive zones, their presence unmistakable even without visible aggression. Radar signatures overlapped. Sonar pings echoed in waters that had once been predictably calm. On the Svalbard, Captain Erik Lund watched the horizon through polarized lenses, jaw set. He had served in these waters for 20 years and knew their moods intimately. Today, the sea felt crowded. "Contact bearing 075. The sonar officer reported quietly. Lund nodded. "American." "Yes, sir. Likely surface group. Holding course." No alarm sounded. No weapon systems activated. Yet the tension on the bridge thickened. Every officer understood the rules of engagement. But they also understood how easily rules bent under pressure. Back in Oslo, emergency sessions convened between civilian leadership and military command. The question dominating the room was not whether the United States was an ally, it was how far an ally might go when interests diverged. Norway's intelligence service presented a sober assessment. "We are seeing coordinated activity," the director explained. "Cyber probing, naval positioning, strategic messaging. This is not an accident. It is leverage demanded response. The decision was made to increase Arctic patrols and activate defensive cyber protocols. The measures were defensive by design. But in international politics, defense often looked indistinguishable from defiance. Washington noticed immediately, within hours. American media began circulating stories questioning Norway's reliability and alignment. Think tanks published op-eds warning that regional fragmentation weakened NATO's northern flank. The narrative shifted subtly, painting Norwegian caution as obstruction publicly. Leaders exchanged polite words privately. Patience eroded. The Arctic night fell early that day, plunging the north into a darkness broken only by auroras rippling green across the sky. From space, the region looked serene, beautiful even. From beneath the surface, data streams surged, signals crossed, and calculations multiplied. History often marks wars with explosions and declarations. This one began with quieter sounds: the click of keyboards, the hum of engines, the low-frequency pulse of sonar sweeping icebound depths. As the Svalbard continued its patrol, Captain Lund felt the weight of something unspoken settling over his crew. No one said the word war. No one needed it to. Far away, in offices warm with artificial light, decisions were being shaped that would soon test alliances, redefine borders, and prove whether restraint still had a place in a world hungry for control. The ice had not cracked yet, but beneath the silence, it was beginning to strain. The Arctic night did not full it swallowed. Darkness writhed like a tide, erasing horizons and compressing distance until sea and sky became indistinguishable. In that darkness, technology replaced sight, and trust became the most fragile resource all. At Norway's joint headquarters in Bode, the lights never dimmed, screens glowed with satellite feeds, radar arcs, and scrolling data streams. Officers rotated through shifts without ceremony, coffee replacing sleep, tension replacing routine. What had once been a quiet monitoring operation had become something closer to a siege of information. The first confirmed cyber intrusion struck just after 2 o'clock local time. It began with a flicker. A logistics server managing Arctic fuel depots reported corrupted timestamps. Seconds later, authentication failures cascaded across unrelated systems. The signatures were subtle, almost elegant, designed not to destroy, but to confuse. Norway's cyber defense unit isolated the breach within minutes. But the message was unmistakable. This was not probing anymore. Colonel Ingrid Nilsson stood with her arms crossed, eyes fixed on the main display. She had spent her career in signals intelligence, watching conflicts unfold long before soldiers ever moved. She knew. Began as patterns. This is coordinated, she said quietly. Multiple vectors. Someone wants us. Distracted, her deputy nodded, or exhausted. Far from Bode, beneath kilometers of frozen sea, a Norwegian submarine drifted silently between fjord walls. The KN ran on minimal power, its crew communicating in whispers and gestures. Sonar painted ghostly outlines of the underwater train and something else, an American submarine. It maintained distance, careful not to provoke, yet close enough to be unmistakable. To predators circling the same territory, each pretending not to watch the other too closely. The captain of the Red logged the contact without comment. Protocols existed for the scenario. So did instincts. Above the ice, American surveillance drones traced long arcs through the sky. their engines barely audible over the wind. Official flight plans labeled them as environmental monitoring platforms. Their sensor packages told a different story. In Washington, the Situation Room hummed with restrained urgency. Advisors debated language as much as action. Every option carried risk not only of escalation, but of perception. Norway was an ally. Treating it like an adversary could fracture alliances far beyond the Arctic. Yet pressure mounted. Energy corporations briefed lawmakers on stalled projects and threatened supply vulnerabilities. Strategic analysts warned that hesitation could invite other powers into the vacuum, the Arctic. They argued, rewarded decisiveness. The president listened, finger steepled. Expression unreadable. "We are not invading anyone," she said finally. "But we will not be boxed out of the future either." Orders went out measured, deniable, calibrated. Back in Norway, ports along the northern coast began experiencing unexplained slowdowns. Automated cranes froze mid-operation. Customs databases desinced. No explosions. No casualties, just friction. Enough to disrupt commerce. Enough to apply pressure without. Fingerprints. Norwegian media picked up the story quickly. Experts appeared on evening broadcasts, speaking carefully about technical anomalies while viewers read between the lines. Social media filled the gaps with speculation, fear, and anger. Hashtags trended. Narratives polarized. Alliance or occupation in transics. Fishermen delayed departures, wary of naval traffic clogging once familiar waters. In Kirkens, parents walked children to school through snow-thickened Bionese. The war, still unnamed, had begun touching civilian life. Inside NATO channels, communication grew strained. Emergency consultation circled round phrasing and precedent. Smaller member states watched closely, measuring what Norway's experience might mean for them one day. Colonel Nilsson received a classified report just before dawn. Satellite imagery showed American task groups repositioning still outside Norwegian territorial waters, but closer than before. The margins were shrinking. She exhaled slowly. "They're tightening the net." "What do we do?" her deputy asked. "We don't blink," she replied. "But we don't strike." That balance, firm without force, was becoming harder to maintain by the hour. In the polar darkness, misinterpretation was as dangerous as intent. A delayed signal, a misread maneuver. A nervous operator any could light the fuse, somewhere beneath the ice. The Ured adjusted course by 2 degrees. A move so slight it would go unnoticed by anyone not watching closely. But someone was watching. And in the Arctic night, shadows were beginning to move with purpose. The Arctic does not forgive mistakes. It preserves them. As the third week of rising tension began, the cold grew sharper, as if the environment itself were responding to human indecision. Ice thickened along shipping lanes faster than forecast models predicted. Wind shifted unpredictably, disrupting flight schedules and sensor reliability. Nature, indifferent to politics, added its own pressure to an already brittle situation at sea. Norwegian naval commanders adjusted tactics. Patrols became shorter, but more frequent. Overlapping like interlocking shields, the goal was presence without provocation, a message written. In movement rather than words, every maneuver was logged, replayed, debated. In Washington, those same maneuvers were studied frame by frame. Their hardening, an analyst noted, gesturing at a display filled with tracks and vectors, not offensively, defensively. "But it limits our flexibility." Flexibility for what? Another voice asked. No one answered. Directly, the first near incident occurred at 1437 Zulu. An American destroyer operating in international waters altered course to avoid an unexpected ice surge. Simultaneously, a Norwegian frigate adjusted speed while conducting a training drill nearby. Automated systems reacted faster than human judgment, triggering collision avoidance protocols that briefly locked both vessels into converging paths. Alarms sounded. On both bridges, officers shouted commands, hands flying across controls. Seconds stretched unbearably long before manual overrides broke the feedback loop. The ships passed within visual range. Close enough for a cruise to see faces through frost-streaked glass. No shots were fired, but the message was unmistakable. Footage leaked within hours. Captured by a civilian research vessel, grainy video showed two warships slicing past each other against a backdrop of ice and grey sky. Commentators filled the airwaves with speculation. Was it aggression? Was it incompetence? Or was it something more dangerous, miscalculation in Oslo? The Prime Minister addressed the nation that evening. Her tone was calm, but the words were firm. Norway seeks no conflict, but we will not compromise our responsibility to protect our people, our waters, and our future in Washington. The response came as a statement emphasizing alliance unity. Paired quietly with additional deployments authorized for stability, the fracture widened. Cyber operations intensified on both sides, not openly acknowledged, but unmistakable to those who understood the language. Financial systems flickered. News algorithms amplified extreme voices. Deepfake audio clips briefly surfaced online, purporting to show Norwegian officials discussing secret concessions. They were debunked within hours, but damage lingered. Truth, once questioned, never fully recovers. Within Norway's military, debates sharpened. Younger officers argued that restraint was being interpreted as weakness. Veterans cautioned that escalation favored larger powers, the line between prudence and paralysis blurred. Colonel Ingrid Nilsson found herself awake long after her shift ended, staring at threat matrices that no longer felt theoretical. She knew the statistics. Most modern conflicts did not begin with intent, but with error compounded by pride. She drafted a memo recommending a limited transparency initiative, shared observation windows, advanced maneuver notifications. It was a gamble. Openness could reduce risk or expose vulnerabilities. The memo stalled in committee. Meanwhile, beneath the ice, the underwater chess game grew more complex. The KN Emirad detected multiple contexts, now American, Norwegian, and at least one unidentified signature that did not match known profiles, a reminder that others were watching, waiting for cracks to widen. Energy infrastructure became the new focal point. A pressure anomaly rippled through a subsea pipeline feeding mainland Europe. Automatic shutoffs engaged, preventing disaster. But the implication was chilling. No evidence of sabotage emerged. None was needed. Vulnerability had been demonstrated. Markets reacted instantly. Energy prices spiked. Insurance premiums soared. Boardrooms thousands of kilometers away felt the Arctic's pulse for the first time. Civilians noticed, too. Rolling blackouts hit parts of northern Norway as precautionary measures kicked in. Schools adjusted schedules. Hospitals activated contingency plans. Life continued, but under a growing sense that something fundamental had shifted. The war still had no name. That night, wars blazed unusually bright, curtains of green and violet tearing across the sky. In another time, people would have gathered to watch in awe. Now, many looked up and wondered whether beauty could exist so close to catastrophe. On a secure line that bypassed official channels, a Norwegian defense official and an American counterpart spoke for the first time in days. "We're approaching a line," the Norwegian said. "We think you crossed it already," came the reply. Silence followed. In the Arctic, fracture lines rarely announce themselves with noise. They form quietly, invisibly, until the moment the ice gives way. and both sides could feel it thinning beneath their feet. By the fourth week, the Arctic was no longer merely tense, it was brittle. Every system, human and machine alike, operated at the edge of tolerance. Commanders spoke less, listened more, and slept in fragments measured in minutes rather than hours. The space for error had narrowed too. A breath, the trigger, when it came, was almost absurdly small. A data packet misrouted, duplicated, delayed by milliseconds appeared on a shared early warning network. To an automated filter, it resembled a launch signature, not a confirmed one. Not even a probable one, just enough to demand attention in Alaska. Warning lights pulsed amber. In northern Norway, systems responded in kind. Humans stepped in quickly, as they were trained to do, but the damage was already done. Alerts rippled through command chains, phones rang, secure channels lit up for 6 long minutes. The world balanced on a misunderstanding. No missiles launched, but trust eroded further. The American task group in the North Atlantic shifted posture, adopting a defensive formation that looked, from the outside, indistinguishable from preparation. Norwegian coastal batteries adjusted readiness levels. Radar operators tracked more aggressively. Pilots sat in cockpits longer than regulations allowed. Engines idling in frozen air. The Arctic became crowded with anticipation. Inside NATO headquarters, emergency consultations collapsed into argument. Some members urged decisive American leadership. Others warned that alliance credibility depended on restraint toward its own members. Norway, usually quiet in such rooms, spoke sharply. "We are not the problem to be managed," the ambassador said. "We are a nation to be respected." Back channels finally stirred. A retired Norwegian diplomat, long removed from public office but trusted across capitals, placed a call that official channels could not. His counterpart was an American strategist whose name never appeared in headlines. They spoke. Without aids, without notes. "This is drifting," the Norwegian said, "and drift becomes collision." The American paused. "We see the same thing." Within hours, a discreet meeting was arranged, not in Oslo or Washington, but in Reykjavik, far from cameras and symbolism. The choice was intentional. Neutral ground, cold clarity. As diplomats flew under cover of routine travel, events at sea threatened to outrun them. During a joint search and rescue exercise that had been planned months earlier and never formally cancelled, Norwegian and American aircraft entered overlapping airspace. Protocols existed to deconflict such encounters. They failed. A Norwegian pilot reported radar lock. An American systems officer interpreted a maneuver as aggressive. Warnings escalated. Targeting systems engaged, then disengaged, then engaged again as human operators fought machine logic. For 27 seconds, weapons stood ready. Then a voice cut through the noise. "Break. Break. This is exercise traffic. Disengage." The command came from a Norwegian controller who had memorized outdated call signs but trusted his instincts. Both aircraft peeled away, afterburners flaring against the night. The incident never reached the public in full. Those who knew understood how close it had come in Reykjavik. Talks began without ceremony. Coffee cooled and touched as words did the work of weapons. Each side laid out grievances, fears, red lines. Maps were spread, timelines reconstructed, assumptions challenged. "We mistook your caution for obstruction," the American admitted, "and we mistook your pressure for preparation," the Norwegian replied. Outside, snow fell steadily, indifferent to confession. Back home, commanders waited. At sea, ships held position. Captains staring at instruments that told them everything except what the other side truly intended. After 14 hours, a framework emerged. No declarations, no victories, just agreement. De-escalation corridors, shared observation protocols, a pause on forward repositioning. Most importantly, a direct line that bypassed bureaucracy and spoke in human voices. The orders went out quietly. Postures softened. Aircraft returned to base. Submarines widened distance by kilometers that felt. Like continents, the brink receded. But no one mistook survival for a resolution. The Arctic had exposed something fundamental. Alliances, like ice, held only as long as pressure was evenly distributed. As the polar night deepened, the region exhaled not in relief, but in weary pause. The next chapter, everyone knew, would decide whether that pause became peace or merely an intermission. Peace does not arrive like victory. It seeps in quietly, testing whether it is welcome. The first sign of de-escalation was not an announcement, but absence. Sonar screens that had pulsed with context fell calm. Airspace once crowded with overlapping. Patrols cleared into clean corridors. In operations rooms across Norway and the United States, officers stared at displays that finally showed what planners always hoped for and rarely trusted. Nothing happening. Orders flowed downward in carefully worded directives. Stand-down levels adjusted incrementally. Readiness states softened without disappearing. Every step was reversible by design. A recognition that confidence, once fractured, required proof before belief in Oslo. The Prime Minister addressed Parliament again. This chapter, she said, reminds us that sovereignty is not defended by isolation, nor alliance by submission. It is defended by clarity, capability, and calm. The words were broadcast live across the country. In northern towns, people paused in shops and kitchens to listen. Fishermen on late runs kept radios on. Soldiers watched from barracks where boots were still lined by doors, just in case, in Washington. The tone was similar, but shaped by different pressures. The president spoke of responsibility, of leadership that avoided war not out of fear, but out of strength. She acknowledged disagreements without naming them and praised allies without ranking them. Markets responded before voters did. Energy prices eased. Shipping insurers revised risk models. Boardrooms recalculated projections that no longer assumed crisis premiums. The Arctic, for the first time in weeks, began to feel predictable again. But predictability did not mean forgetfulness. In Reykjavik, the framework hardened into agreements. Joint observation zones were formalized. Cyber incident hotlines established. Exercise protocols were written to prioritize transparency over signaling. None of it made headlines. All of it mattered. Military professionals on both sides conducted brutal internal reviews in Norway. Commanders examined how quickly defensive measures could appear provocative under another's lens. In the United States, planners confronted how pressure applied to allies carried different moral and strategic costs. Then pressure applied to rivals, mistakes were catalogued. So were lessons. Colonel Ingrid Nielsen finally went home after 38 days of near-continuous duty. She slept for 12 hours, then returned to her office to find a promotion notice waiting. She read it once, set it aside, and began drafting new doctrine. Titles, she knew, did not prevent wars. Systems did. At sea, the KN Emured surfaced briefly in a fjord where ice reflected pale winter light. Crew members stood on deck, breathing cold air that no longer felt threatening. The American submarine that had shadowed them weeks earlier was long gone, its absence oddly reassuring. Civilians adjusted slowly. Schools returned to normal schedules. Hospitals deactivated. Contingencies, Northern Lights tours resumed. Guides pointing skyward while carefully avoiding recent history. Duty reclaimed its place. but not its innocence. Internationally, the episode became a case study. Analysts would later describe it as a non-war, a conflict resolved before it could define itself. Others called it a warning shot fired by systems rather than soldiers. In academic journals, phrases like gray zone escalation and alliance friction appeared, with footnotes tracing back to those weeks in the Arctic for Norway. The outcome affirmed something deeply held: small nations could assert boundaries without severing bonds. For the United States, it reinforced a harder truth: leadership required listening as much as leverage. The Arctic itself bore the quietest testimony. Ice continued to melt and refreeze. Currents shifted. The environment remained indifferent, reminding all involved that future conflicts would be shaped as much by climate as by politics. The final night of the crisis timeline, a joint statement was released. It was brief. It spoke of cooperation, stability, and shared responsibility in the High North. It promised continued dialogue and mutual respect. It contained no apologies and no threats. That restraint was its power. History would not remember this moment for battles fought or cities lost. It would remember it, if at all, as a pause where war might have been and wasn't. And in that absence, in that narrow space between intention and action, Norway and America learned that the greatest victories of the modern age were often the ones never claimed. The Arctic returned to silence. This time, it held.